Hello everybody and welcome back. As you know, the website's up and running now, and here's an account that's come in through the website, which is wonderful. It shows that it's working and people are popping over there and having a look. And this is from a gentleman called Paul, who wrote in about an experience that happened when he was on holiday. He says, "My name is Paul, and I recently came across your website regarding strange phenomena and large hairy creatures sighted around the British Isles. And having read some of the accounts, I felt I wanted to share a peculiar experience I had whilst on holiday in a valley eastward from about 3 miles from Dalmally in Scotland. My mother and I joined my brother and his son and their crossbreed terrier, Max, for a very secluded 1-week family holiday in an isolated cottage. The cottage was situated between the hills on either side of us, and we were in a narrow valley near Arachnafarnish in Scotland earlier this year in about 2018. The valley was covered in dense woodland, mostly on one side of the valley, and on the south side the hills were barren, and a narrow road ran through the vale for approximately about 11 miles before joining the main thoroughfare in the direction of Fort William. A river also ran along the foot of the hills on the south side. One heartfelt observation was the fact that this valley was very eerily quiet, and I did notice there were no birds singing in the daytime, which I thought was very strange. I also was very conscious of the isolation of our cottage, and I sensed the area had an uncanny feeling about it, despite the fact that people could be seen cycling or walking or driving on occasion through the valley at various times during the day out there. The silence of the area was such that you could hear the sounds of the river flowing through the valley, accompanied by the occasional bleating of sheep dotted along the southern slope. My strange encounter begins with my walking Max the dog along the road heading westerly away from the cottage, with the river to my left, which could be seen and heard approximately 300 yards or so across a wetland meadow, which inclined incrementally towards the river, which followed the winding of the road along the valley floor. And it was a hot sunny day with clear crisp sky, and as we walked you could see the hills in the distance towards Fort William, and this was a very picturesque view to see. After I'd walked about 2 miles, the road began to dip downwards, and the river to my left began to divide in places, and part of the river came even closer to the roadside, where there were trees banked along the left side, and the heavily wooded hillside to my right began to reach down to the road. Prior to this point, the wooded hillside had been separated from the road in places by marshy-looking fields on the north side of the valley. Now, however, the scenery had changed, and the views in the distance had disappeared along with the view of the river, which had now become blocked in places due to the boundaries of trees that align the roadway. It was at this point that I became suddenly aware of the intensity of the silence that surrounded me, apart from the noise of moving water which ran parallel and was closer to the road. Then suddenly, as I inched further forward under the trees that were now on either side of me, I heard the sound of stones being bashed together, and followed by intermittent chipping sounds, as if someone or something was using the stones to crush something. As I listened to this strange behaviour, I slowly moved forward to get a clearer view of the river, and attempt to see who or what was making the noise. Although I could see very clearly parts of the river, which had become much wider in expanse across the valley floor, I could not see who or what was bashing the stones together as I looked through the gaps in the trees. I was able to observe that the riverbed at this point was very stony, and across the river I could clearly see a pile of stones on the opposite bank of the river that had been manually stacked up to about 3 feet high. I could still hear the chipping or bashing of stones that seemed to be coming from the other side of the river, about 400 to 500 yards away. Suddenly, I became very afraid for some unknown reason. I was unable to explain what the nature of this bizarre incident was. I decided that it might be unsafe to proceed, so I turned to head back the way I came. I could still hear the noise of stones being smashed together as I moved away. The area began to open up again to the meadows on either side, and the sound I had heard earlier began to lessen. I'd gone about a quarter of a mile when all of a sudden, from the dense woodland of pine trees now on my left, I heard a loud knocking sound of wood being bashed against a tree. To see if I could see who or what had made the noise, but I could not see into the darkness of the tree line that was approximately 200 yards from where I stood. Suddenly, I was disturbed by a second loud knock from the same section of woods, which made me jump with fright. I then spoke in a loud, shaky voice that whoever you are who's making that noise, I intend you no harm. I intend no harm to you, and I don't want to receive any harm to me. Thank you. I saw nothing, and the noise did not occur again, so I began to walk back to the cottage. Along the way, I was passed by a big 4-track vehicle being driven by a female, and as I stopped on the verge to my right, the driver suddenly steered her vehicle directly at me, forcing me right onto the verge and narrowly missing me by a few inches. This incident made me respond angrily at the driver and raising my fingers in a gesture as she drove on into the distance from where I heard the bashing of the stones at the point where the road went downhill. On my return to the cottage, I relayed to my family what had happened, and I felt that the sounds I had heard were the type of noises consistent with the behaviour of a Bigfoot, and I informed my family to be careful when out and about on their own, as I believed the solitude of this valley to be conducive to Bigfoot activity. This may explain the eerie silence that I felt from the first day I entered the valley, and the lack of birdsong, etc. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope that others will be encouraged to share their experiences, no matter how trivial it may seem to them at the time. Paul from Hampshire. Now, less than a few miles away from this account, we have one that is very similar indeed, and it's called the Lock and Tee Thumps and Knocks, and this was in 2000. And as you'll see from the witness's own words, it was just very strange as Paul's account. And she said, it happened around August, September 2000. I was with both of my parents up at Lock and Tee. We were walking along the side of the loch about 6 miles up a forestry track, and we were collecting gravel for my dad's cactus collection that day. I must apologise, it's Loch Etive. They were at Loch Etive collecting gravel. We were collecting gravel for my dad's cactus collection that day, so this area was ideal for finding the gravel. Anyway, we were there for about an hour or so, and every so often we could hear knocks and this loud thudding noise coming from the woods beside us. It did feel at times like we were being watched, and I don't think there was another person. It was very strange. Now, there are many accounts in this area, so I've just picked out a few, but another one that's interesting, and this is a little bit more than audio, is that in 2016, and that's the account of the 2 wild men hunting on the road to Taynult. And a gentleman wrote in and he said, I'd like to report an incident that happened to me in Argyll, Scotland, one of my favourite places to be. It was down on one of the single-track roads that runs between Taynult and Dalmally on the road that runs along the side of Loch Awe. There are miles and miles of forestry tracks that you can walk along down there. And it's a good place to be if you want solitude. You can walk for hours without bumping into anyone. There are tracks and trails crisscrossing the area. It's just a short walk from Loch Etive and Loch Awe, and it has multiple places to go off track and just enjoy the time out in nature. Although I do question walking alone after seeing what I can only describe as a hunting party of 2 out there on the road that night, something I will never forget. It happened on a cool night at around 1 a.m. in March 2016. And I was driving back from a friend's house after an evening of chat, and I was sober and in good spirits. I was alone in the car at this point, and I was driving through the older parts of the forest, and I noticed a movement as I was driving. suddenly from my left-hand side. I was startled by a deer running across the road, running as fast as it could, in flight. I didn't have time to think what was chasing it. I looked back to see, and it was being followed by a large man-like creature, really tall and very hairy, and he was running, moving at a fast pace. He took one long stride across the road. Without thinking, I stopped, my eyes fixed on the running man. You see, the thing was, as soon as I hit the brakes and turned to look where they had come from, out of the trees to my left, I saw what looked like another one. This figure was smaller, younger, not so big and muscled, but a wild man type thing all the same. He wasn't looking at me, but looking towards where the bigger one ran into the trees. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen. To this day, I still question it. I did get a good look at both of them, and the moon was out and it was clear, and it was a crisp night. It's not like I could have mistaken them for something else. They looked like two wild men hunting. The first one that crossed over the road after the deer was at a height of, I guess, about 8 feet tall. He had hair all over his body, and it was actually colour at night, but it was dark, just like the smaller one. It wasn't a huge road, but even so, its stride must have been at least 6 feet to cover the distance in one leap like that. The way it moved was startling to me. It was fluid and fast. The one on the hill looked smaller and younger, and the eyes were very strange. The smaller one looked back at me with reflecting, glowing eyes like a dog's eye does in the dark. It did not follow, but backed into the darkness of the trees, and I was off, as it gave me quite a fright. Well, that's understandable, isn't it? And it's thanks to witnesses like this gentleman and all of the other people who report their strange encounters that we can start to piece together a jigsaw. And there are a number of sightings around the Lochans in that area of Scotland. Lots of people reporting matching or similar experiences over a number of years in a very small area. Each hearing wood knocks or stone clacks, or seeing caveman-like creatures hunting or road crossing. Strange howls and growls and mystery figures, and I'm sure as the years roll on and even more accounts will be unearthed, we may start to understand some of the strangeness of this area. Maybe some of you are future witnesses, who knows? As it could happen to any of us at any time, it seems. So, until next time, thank you all very much for joining me. Good night.